on this episode of Raising the Wild Ones podcast. Doug Van Dorn is here with us, and I was reading a little bit on his website, and he's got a lot of cool stuff. He's a Christian, he's a pastor, podcaster, author. It also says mountain climber on here, which is really cool. I don't know if that pertains to what we're talking about today, but it's written on his thing, so I'm going to say it.
You know, you got to go with what's clear from the scripture. And the clearest thing that I can find in terms of origins of these guys is also found in Job, Job 38, and then verse 7. And this is where God is confronting Job with, basically how he thinks he knows everything and he doesn't really know anything at all. And God says, "Where were you?" And then he starts off by saying, "When I created the foundations of the earth." And then he throws this line in there where it says, "When the sons of God were shouting for joy and the morning stars were singing." And I think the same thing is true of Satan. And in fact, John explains that when he says that he can no longer deceive the nations. And this is super duper important for people to at least hear and think about, okay? That was a radical shift in all of human history that we continue to live under today. So that's a lot, I know, but...
Oh, yeah. It's fine. I've got a note written over here going, "Ask Doug to come talk about the end times."
Raising the Wild Ones podcast.
Welcome to Raising the Wild Ones podcast. I'm Dustin, one co-host. Caleb's the second co-host. He's over there. And we've got Doug Van Dorn is here with us. And I was reading a little bit on his website, and he's got a lot of cool stuff. He's a Christian, he's a pastor, podcaster, author. It also says mountain climber on here, which is really cool. I don't know if that pertains to what we're talking about today, but it's written on his thing, so I'm going to say it, right? And so he's done a lot of really cool podcasts, written a lot of neat books and stuff like that. And we're excited to talk to him about the topic today, Satan. But before we kind of jump into that, Doug, is there anything that you would like to say about yourself or something to kind of kick us off here?
I mean, I've just been a pastor for a long time. We were talking ahead of time, and I can't believe it, 23 years or something that I've been at this church. So that's a while. I think they say the average pastor lasts like 2 to 4 years in one church. I think it's like 2 years in one church and then like 4 years total in ministry or something. It's not good. So I guess I'm breaking the trend.
You're breaking the trend. And so, I mean, since 2001, yeah, that's, you're good. You got your tenure, right? You've worked with the congregation. I don't
think that quite works that way, but yeah.
Yeah, you got tenure. They can't fire you at all, right? Well, awesome. Well, our topic today is Satan, which is super, super broad. And I guess kind of to start off is, do you have any like kind of quick words to kind of like jump us into this topic, Doug, of like, well, I guess, why is it important? I mean, we kind of know the idea of like, know your enemy, I don't know. It's just a big, broad topic. You got anything kind of to jump start us into this here, Doug?
Well, maybe the whole idea that a lot of Christians are hesitant to even bring up the name. These are the Christians that actually believe in him. And they don't want to talk about demonic stuff. They don't want to talk about satanic stuff. They think that if you just talk about it, you will automatically like somehow cause it to come and do something terrible in your life, or, make a demon come and live in your house. That's not the way that this works. So there's nothing wrong with thinking about the enemy, and the more we know about the enemy, the better we can fight against the enemy. So that's, put the superstition stuff aside and try and dig into what the scripture teaches about him, and maybe what some of the other people in the ancient world thought about him, and go from there.
Well, all right. Well, I guess we could start with kind of the ancient world, I guess, or maybe the origins of the word Satan itself. Kind of where, I mean, that's what we call him, but is that just like a descriptor, or how does all that work? Is because I know I've heard some translations it just says the Satan,
right.
And
right.
So is it like, I guess we could start there too.
Yeah, this is a great question. I mean, you could take a long time and talk about it if you wanted to, but I guess the short of it is that Satan is a word that just means an adversary. So it can be a good person or a bad person. In fact, in the Balaam story, I think this is Numbers 22:22, easy to remember. Balaam is confronted by the angel of the Lord, and the angel of the Lord, who in my view is actually Christ in the Old Testament, is actually called the Satan. That doesn't mean that he's evil. It just means that he's the adversary of Balaam at that point in time.
Interesting.
Another thing to know about the word is that it was used in kind of legal courtroom settings for almost like a prosecuting attorney. So this is really what you're finding when you go to Job chapter 1 and 2, where it says that Satan went with the sons of God into heaven, and there was like this heavenly entourage, and then they start having a discussion over Job and his fate and stuff like that at God's instigation. And that's where you've probably heard the translation, the Satan, as opposed to Satan. So most English translations will give it a capital letter S, and that will make you think that it's the same entity that we find in the New Testament, which it's possible. I don't know that on that particular one, I don't know that I care that much, because the New Testament doesn't really seem to even discuss Job 1 and 2. So I like, whatever. It could just be a prosecuting attorney. It could be the arch enemy of the Christian and Jewish world. Whatever it is, it's somebody who is going to do something bad to Job in order to test his faith. So there he would just be, if he's just a generic Satan, he would be the accuser, goes before God. If it's the bad guy of the New Testament, somehow what happened was that this term that was used, in fact, the Jews actually talked about many Satan. There was a whole bunch of them. In fact, you could even talk about the members of the Divine Council in some ways as being a bunch of Satans, not even necessarily in a bad way, but just it's kind of a function that they played. But somehow, some way, that becomes a proper name by the time that you get to the New Testament, so that when you're seeing Satan, tempting Jesus in the wilderness or something like that, or Satan entering Judas, even though most of the time actually in the Greek, it still has the definite article there, we don't translate it that way because it seems to be a proper name. I think that that's probably a right view of how to understand him. He just became Satan.
You look like you're thinking about something over there, Caleb.
Yes. Yeah. Go ahead. I was thinking of my next question. Yeah.
Oh no, I mean, so kind of breaking that down a little bit, I guess jumping to the New Testament. I mean, I guess would that be the same entity as like the fallen angel in Genesis, in Genesis that tempted Eve? It's because you kind of talked a little bit about differences with like the adversary, and just being an adversary is the Satan. Like how does it all play into like spiritual warfare then at that point? I guess I'm asking like a ton of different questions in one question.
Yeah, well, I mean, these are all they're fascinating questions. They're also kind of to some degree speculative, I think. If you're a systematic theology professor, you're going to say without a doubt that the creature in the Garden of Eden was the same one that you find John talking about in Revelation. If you are an Old Testament scholar, you're going to say without a doubt it's totally not the same entity, because it's not right to read the New Testament back into the Old Testament, that kind of stuff. So you find these people fighting with each other. I don't know that either view is necessarily right or wrong. You kind of have to the way I do it, just kind of go with the evidence. And I think, as far as the guy in the Garden of Eden, that even though the Jews of the intertestamental time discussed various names and characters for the person in the Garden of Eden, and so even they didn't all agree on who he was, I think that when John in Revelation identifies a single character with four terms, he calls him, what does he call him? The devil, Satan, the dragon, and the serpent. When he connects the Satan term with the serpent term, like, where else would you be getting that from other than the Genesis 3 story?
Yeah.
Maybe the Genesis 6 story, but that doesn't really work. And so where else would it be coming from? And I think that means that at least John, in what I think is an inspired text, really is identifying that figure with the archenemy of God. And that leads to a whole series of really fascinating things that could mean. But, just kind of to start it off, I think that I'm perfectly comfortable saying that is the same guy that you find in both places. It's weird, especially when you start looking into more the nitty gritty of the topic. But on the surface, it doesn't really seem to me to be a problem.
And I'll read that Bible verse real quick, which you mentioned in Revelation 12, chapter verse 9. It says, "The great dragon was hurled down, that ancient serpent called the devil or Satan, who leads the whole world astray." So there's where you get the dragon, the serpent, the devil, or Satan. And that kind of kicks back to Revelation 3, where the serpent tempts Eve. So give a little background on that.
Yeah.
Well, how then? I guess where do we get like the origins? I mean, I want to say about origins. I'm trying to figure out how do I phrase this question. It's I guess my kind of thought is we've got like these different characters, and I guess where does it all start? I mean, Genesis is that kind of just the beginning of it, and does it like grow when you get into like Genesis 6 when you start talking about fallen angels? Like I could even go like one of the other questions I was thinking is would Satan or the devil be one of the fallen angels that came in Genesis 6, one of the sons of
Right.
God?
Right.
Would he be in that? Or I mean, I mean, it's all interesting for me to just kind of like sit there and think about. And so, kind of, what are your thoughts on? I mean, I guess the origins, I guess, is what I'm trying to get at
Yeah.
here.
So, I mean, this also gets difficult, and it's also super interesting to try and think through. You got to go, for me, you got to go with what's clear from the scripture. And the clearest thing that I can find in terms of origins of these guys is also found in Job, Job 38, and then verse 7. And this is where God is confronting Job with, basically how he thinks he knows everything and he doesn't really know anything at all. And God says, "Where were you?" And then he starts off by saying, "When I created the foundations of the earth." And then he throws this line in there where it says, "When the sons of God were shouting for joy and the morning stars were singing," and implying that those entities were there. Now, obviously, that can't be humans according to Genesis 1 because humans weren't created until day 6. And he's very clearly talking about something way before day 6. So somebody's there who's been created, and they're watching God create all of this, and they're really excited about it. They're happy about it. That term, sons of God, is technical language that's used about 10 times total in the Old Testament. And it refers every time to heavenly beings that I'm fine saying they're angels if you want to. In fact, the Greek translation of the Old Testament calls them angels sometimes. So I don't remember if that Job verse itself does, but you go to Genesis 6, 2 and 4, where they show up the sons of God, and sometimes they're called the angels there. A couple times in the Psalms, the same sort of a translation is given. So the answer would be that you have this group of people that are these entities that are created, that are there before God made man, that are called morning stars or sons of God or angels. And then you can start expanding that a little bit more. So you go to like the story in Isaiah chapter 14. This is the story where actually we know about Lucifer, because that's the Latin translation for the character who famously shows up in this story. And read this. The famous verses will start in verse 12. "How you are fallen from heaven, O day star, son of dawn." Now you hear that language of a day star. And then a little bit later, the next verse, it talks about he's ascending to heaven above the stars of God. So there you have your morning stars idea that's going on the same there. And this seems to be some sort of a heavenly figure that is behind the earthly king of Babylon, which is what the prophecy is really directed to. But, I think that there's something happening where the king and then some sort of a heavenly being are somehow related to each other. So this word, day star, son of dawn, super interesting. The Latin translates that as Lucifer, the morning star. But the word in the Hebrew is Hallel ben Shakar, and it can mean a shining one. Okay, so shining one, son of the dawn. That's where you get day star. So when you go back to Genesis 3, you find that this creature in the garden is called the Nahash, and we translate that as the serpent. However, that's what the word means as a noun. If you translate it as an adjective in a form of grammar called a substantival adjective, so that's where, like, if you know the title of the Clint Eastwood movie, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, that title is actually using 3 adjectives as nouns, even though they're adjectives. So that if you translated serpent there as an adjective, which you can, then its translation would actually be the shining one instead of the serpent, which is an exact parallel to the creature in Isaiah 14:12, the shining one, son of dawn. And so when you do that, then you start to go, well, now what is being talked about here, right? So you've fallen from heaven, shining one, son of dawn. You're cut down to the ground, you who laid low the nations. By the way, cut down to the ground sounds very similar to the curse of Satan, where he's to go on his belly. You said in your heart, I will ascend to heaven above the stars of God. I will set my throne on high. I will sit on the mount of assembly. So this is the divine council of heavenly beings in the far reaches of the north. And that's the word Zaphon, the word north. And that word north, Zaphon, was actually the name of a mountain in Syria by the coast of the Mediterranean Sea. And that mountain just so happened to be the mountain of the god Baal. So we'll definitely talk about Baal here in a little bit, but I tend to think that this is actually giving kind of a mythical storyline of what happened in the Garden of Eden, and that it is referring to the same entity that we're talking about.
Interesting, man.
A lot going on there. I know. If you never heard this,
There is
before,
a lot.
like,
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
I mean, I've talked about this stuff for like 15 years, so kind of like the back of my hand. But I remember the first time I heard this, I was just so blown away. I probably had to read it 25 times to let it sink in. But,
Well, and I mean, I don't know. There's so many just different questions. Well, you got something, Caleb?
No, I'm just thinking there's so much that's missed when you read it in English, but if you know the Hebrew, it's just it ties together so well, and that almost adds another layer to it that reinforces what you said. It almost reinforces the fact that it's the same entity, just in a different way that you miss if you're not reading it in the ancient Hebrew or in the Hebrew language.
yeah,
Almost.
100%.
Yeah.
I guess one of the things I'm thinking here is, do we have any like references in the New Testament to the shining one? You know, and that kind of
That's a
that
good
same
point.
kind of shining type of
Well,
from
you
the
have the
Old
star
Testament to the New
imagery.
Testament.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
have Jesus being called the morning star. So you can, that doesn't mean Jesus is Satan, like if you're connecting
No,
Isaiah
no.
14 to that, but that's putting it in the context of Jesus as a heavenly being, as one of the sons of God, as not just one of them, but as the preeminent son of God. And, you know, in Christian theology, he's not just preeminent, he's the creator himself. So, but nevertheless, he's still tied to that language. You know, Venus itself is the star, the morning stars would call it. It's been associated with, just like all the planets, with these fallen entities of time. Yeah, I would say that we do have a little bit of that kind of, there's not a lot, but
Not a lot.
the New Testament is definitely not contradicting what we find in the Old at all.
Man, my mind's just kind of like racing, trying to like put a ton of these
It's like,
pieces
where do you
together.
go from here, right?
And
Yeah.
then you also made a good, the bad, and the ugly comment earlier, and you threw that in there just nonchalantly, and now I'm just thinking about that movie a little bit, but that's not at all
You
what we're
gotta
Hey, that
think
was
about
a-
it, get
that was a
there.
good
It's
movie.
That's
Yeah.
definitely
I know.
the best Clint Eastwood movie
Yeah.
of all time.
I was about to say. Me and my dad watched it, and it's like first 28 minutes, nobody speaks in the whole
Yeah,
movie.
not a
Man.
single word in the
Yeah.
whole movie.
Good stuff.
Yeah.
But I guess one of the things I kind of you kind of mentioned talking a little bit about Baal, and one of the things I've always kind of thought about is so kind of jumping a little bit into the New Testament here, where Satan is tempting Jesus, or the devil, or Lucifer, or whatever kind of the adversary, or whatever is tempting Jesus. One of the things that I've always kind of wondered about is is this entity kind of like the same thing that's deceiving, like, you know, the Roman Empire, or could you say like maybe Baal and like Zeus or Saturn, are they all the same entity, like or not origins, I don't know, maybe a really weird way to say that, but it's
like the beings of Greek mythology, the Zeus, Hercules, like those things.
Yeah, is there any kind of an overlap? between the
Yeah.
biblical worldview of angels that you find with the Greeks? I think the answer to that is yes. I was often puzzled. Why is it that you don't find really Satan hardly at all in the Old Testament, but all of a sudden in the New Testament he's kind of everywhere? Simultaneously, you find Baal everywhere in the Old Testament, and when you come to the New Testament, he's hardly anywhere. It's like, what happened? So there's a really interesting passage, 12, where Jesus is casting out demons, and the Pharisees come up to him and they say, "You're casting out demons by the power of Satan." And in that passage, Jesus equates Beelzebub, and that translates in. So Baal is the word Lord. That's all that word means. So there could be many Baals, just like there could be many Satan. Zebub could either be the Lord of the house or Lord of the flies. Both of those actually kind of strangely fit that passage. And yeah, Lord of the Flies, that's where that book movie title comes from, is from that idea. But if I'm reading that right, then Jesus is essentially equating Baal with Satan in that passage. So that gives you a link. I think this is the very simplistic overview of it, but that gives you the link between those two entities. Now, there's another really fascinating verse in Revelation chapter 2, which is talking to the church at Pergamum. And he says, "I know where you live, where Satan's throne is." And you're like, well, what is that supposed to mean? So when you go and you look it up, you find that Pergamum was home to a gigantic altar, like one of the biggest altars in the ancient world. And it was an altar to Zeus. And they actually called it Zeus's throne. And in fact, the Nazis came during World War I believe, or slightly after, and they pillaged the thing and they took it back to Berlin. And in fact, not only that, but Obama, in his acceptance speech in Denver, Colorado, back in whatever that was, 2012, decided to replicate that altar to Zeus to be his stage where he accepted the nomination.
I'm totally.
Go look. I've never heard that.
I got to see this.
What year was that?
2012. Yeah. We're
looking it
stuff.
up right now.
Yeah, that was in. That's crazy. That was in Mile High Stadium, the rebuilt one. But at any rate, what you find is that you find that this throne to Satan and the throne to Zeus are almost certainly the same thing, which would mean that John is linking Zeus directly to Satan. So now, if you just do a comparison between those two passages, you find that if Satan is Baal and Satan is Zeus, then that most likely means that Baal is Zeus. Now, when you start looking up what Baal looks like and what his aspects were as the lightning storm god, and this god who tries to usurp his father and all this kind of stuff, and then you go to the myth of Zeus with the Greeks, you find that same thing. He's the lightning storm god who usurped his father. And so there's all kinds of reasons that people have long connected Zeus and Baal as the same entity.
Could you also, I mean, I'm just kind of sitting here thinking, because that's my mind's like kind of on that storm god, like Thor and Odin. I mean,
yeah, it's very possible. I think so. I think that the Norse probably is a younger culture, and they probably took their myths in some way or another from the Greeks and the Romans. It might have gone the other way, but probably not. And yeah, because Odin and Thor are just there's too many similarities, especially.
So when we're watching the Marvel movies, is that are we watching?
The Marvel movies are literally. I mean, Stan Lee, first of all, knew his mythology. Second of all, hold on a second. I got a sneeze that got stuck in there.
Oh man,
Stan Lee, he creates this world of these superheroes that when you start thinking about what they're doing, they really are kind of the modern iteration of what the gods were. People that say that we don't worship the gods today, first of all, they don't understand the comeback that those things are making in a wider sense. But second, have no idea the power of story and myth, the way that these things can kind of repackage themselves for
man.
This is great. Back to the Obama thing for a minute. What do you what do you think that was? Why would he want to
how deep you want me to go speculate on that one?
Let's speculate. Let's hear it. I never knew that.
Yeah, well, I think Obama was groomed in some way or another to be a very, very, very dark figure in the 21st century. And I think that it was a ritual. Just like you find rituals that are now undergone during the Super Bowl and Olympic opening ceremonies and stuff. Like these are they're not just doing this for fun. There's some sort of occultic aspect. And I think that they really believe that they can bring powers down from other realms and, to what potential degree that they would influence or possess or give somebody power in exchange for something else. I think that that's exactly what Obama.
Interesting.
And so,
Well,
and so many, I was going to say so many musicians like Taylor Swift or people do these crazy things that it's like people just go crazy for them. But you really got to think about what is actually happening when they're doing these things.
So it's even a little wilder. I forgot about this, but actually Adolf Hitler recreated the very same thing. And it became this gigantic theater where he would basically do all of his great speeches during World War II and prior to it. And when you look at the mesmerizing, hypnotic effect that guy had over the people, you go something supernatural, something occult is definitely at work here. Well, why in the world would Obama and Hitler both try and reproduce this ancient throne of Zeus to be their set, if you will, for these speeches that they give? There's reasons for that. It's not an accident.
and why is that something that's not just plastered all over the news when he did it?
Well, it was, but it didn't last.
Was it?
Yeah.
You
can find newspapers for both of those things, but
was the connection made between Obama and Hitler that, hey, they like Obama's copying Hitler and doing the same thing?
Yeah, you can find articles that were written about that. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, yeah, I looked this up only a couple of months ago for a sermon I was doing in, I think, Acts, so it's kind of fresh in my mind.
I'm gonna look at
Well, it's really, it's really intriguing just to think. I mean, symbolism has power, and there's power like almost in the rich. You talked about Hitler. I mean, I've looked a little bit into the occult and how much into the occult Hitler just was.
Yeah,
which, total side note, Caleb, maybe one of these days we should just talk about that. That'd be a cool podcast idea.
Indiana Jones. Sorry, go ahead.
Indiana Jones. and so, but I mean, the thing that I keep thinking about is so kind of jumping it back. Is the throne of Baal and kind of tying Baal together to all these other different entities. Could you like maybe in essence say that all of these mythologies is the people that are worshiping this mythologies are basically just worshiping Satan or the devil with a different faith?
No, I don't. I mean, so some of them are worshiping the same entity, but I think that there's lots of entities. So in order to help you think about how to think about this, you really need to understand something called the Divine Council worldview. And this is something that's been popularized by Dr. Michael Heiser in the last 15 years in his book, The Unseen Realm. I know Dr. Judd Burton, who you've had on the show, he and I talk about this quite a bit. Derek Gilbert, other guys have been trying to help people understand this in the podcast that they're doing. But this really helps you make sense of the invisible realm that we just don't have categories for as in the way that we've learned our modern Christian theology until you see it. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. And really the key behind this worldview is really Deuteronomy chapter 32, verses 7 through, there's many other passages you could go to, but this is kind of the episode. And those verses say this: remember the days of old and consider the years of many generations. And remember, Moses is the one singing this song. And so this was a long time ago to Moses, which means it was a really long time ago. Ask your father and he will show you, your elders, and they will tell you, when the Most High gave to the nations their inheritance, when he divided man, he fixed the borders of the peoples according to the number of the sons of God. So here you have the sons of God idea, or these fallen angels, whatever. And what Moses is saying is that God distributed the nations to, each nation essentially got a son of God to rule over it. So the traditional number for that is 70. That actually comes of nations in the table of nations in Genesis chapter 10, basically 70 sons of Noah that are listed by name. And so 70 becomes the number of the sons of God. Not a coincidence that when you go to Baal theology with the Canaanites, you find that Baal is one of the sons of El, one of the sons of God, the high God El, the Most High, and he has 70 brothers. So they have the exact same kind of idea going on, although their conception, obviously, of the high God is completely different. But nevertheless, it's the same thing. And they believe that, and Moses is teaching that God gives to nations a heavenly angelic entity to rule over it. And essentially he does that as punishment, because what they did at Babel was they tried to usurp God's rule over them. They wanted to make a name for themselves. They climb up the mountain ziggurat of Babel, trying to call down these entities for themselves, which is something I think that they were doing before the flood as well. And for punishment, God says, if you want them that bad, then you can have them. And God then kind of abandons humanity to their rule, to not that he doesn't know, but to see what will happen, and then they lead humanity into darkness. This is exactly what Paul's talking about when he goes to Athens, and he says that everybody knows that there's this unknown God, but people are groping around in darkness, hoping that they might find him, even though God has given everyone their exact boundaries and determined places. Well, that's just Deuteronomy 32, 7 and 8. Okay, so if you understand this, and in fact, Plato says the exact same thing, almost like he read Moses. He says that in ancient days, the gods were distributed by allotment. And he goes, we are Greece, and we are the people of beauty and wisdom. And so God gave us the good gods, Hephaestus and Athena to rule over us. He says Poseidon was given Atlantis to rule over it. And so he's giving this worldview. And the reason why this is helpful is because it helps you to see that it's not just one entity called Satan who everybody worships. Each nation was given a different entity, and to whatever degree or another that entity tried to steal worship from the true God, that's the degree to which they worship the God of their nation or of the other nation. Now, if you can imagine, the political machinations of humans, and think about like the different empires of world history. So you have Rome, kind of the latest one. And then you had, before that, they took over Greece, who was the world empire. And before that was the Persians and the Medes. And before that, it was the Babylonians. And before that, the Assyrians. What you happen is that in each one of these cases, those human cultures take over vast portions of the known world and they rule over them. Then the next one comes in, sweeps in from another place. They take them over and they have an even bigger empire, right? So I imagine that that's probably what's going on in the heavenly realm as well, and maybe even simultaneously, that they're kind of vying for power. And at one point in time, one kind of rules over more territory or more people than others. And at no point in time am I saying, by the way, that God is ever deposed of his most high rule, that he ever ceases to be God, that he ever ceases to be the one in control. This is more kind of like the Most High giving the earth up to proxy kings or vassal kings or something like that to rule in his stead. And it's all part of the grand plan to show people that there's only one God who's ever going to rule the people with wisdom and justice. There's only one man that can ever live the perfect life that is according to the law. And that whole thing culminates, of course, in the person of Jesus Christ. So this isn't a worldview that overthrows Christian theology. It complements it, and it helps you to understand that when the pagans are worshiping somebody like Zeus, or another one is worshiping somebody like Kronos, that they're not necessarily the same entity. So that's where knowing your family trees of the different cultures and their gods is very helpful. So like Zeus is the son of Kronos, and Zeus overthrows Kronos by throwing him into Tartarus, into the pit, during this great war of the Clash of the Titans, as the movie actually. So they're not all the same entity. Satan, now I'll kind of blow your mind one more thing, and then you guys can go, what should I do with this? But the question becomes like, you think about Satan is there in the temptation with Jesus, and he takes him to a high mountain. And then he says, if you bow down to me, I'll give you all the kingdoms in the world. And, the smart person should say, well, how can he have a right to do that? I thought Jesus is king. Jesus already has all the nations, right? So no, not exactly. So when Jesus becomes a human, he empties himself of all his divine prerogative and becomes one of us. And if Satan has all the kingdoms at his disposal to give to Jesus, Okay. And it's a real temptation, then that means we need to take it seriously that Satan has all the kingdoms at his disposal. Like this is not a joke of a temptation. Jesus couldn't just go, well, I'm the one who has all the kingdoms. What kind of a temptation is that? You can do better. He doesn't do that. He counters them with scripture. And so the question is, well, how could Satan have this? So a lot of people think it's because, well, he's the only entity out there and he has everything. No, I don't think so. I think it's because, go back to the divine council allotment idea, and let's say that all these other 70 gods are over these nations. Well, who is Satan over? And I think that the answer to that, the most obvious answer to that, and in fact, you find Jewish intertestamental people explicitly saying this, is that Satan is the prince of Rome. Now, why would that matter? It's because in Jesus' day, what was the power of the earth? It was the Roman Empire.
Oh,
if he was the prince of Egypt, he wouldn't have had that kind of power. Even the prince of Greece, at that time, he wouldn't have had that kind of power. But the prince of Rome had that kind of power because Rome is the empire of the world.
So this kind of brings
awesome.
me to, yeah, it is. This kind of brings me to, Daniel 10 verse 13, where basically, Daniel prays and an angel comes and says, I got held up by the prince of Persia. And then Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me. How does that kind of tie in with what you just talked about, as far as, I guess that's a good way of saying, well, is that Satan or is that a different entity? What's kind of going on there?
Okay. So, I personally tend to think that the prince of Persia and the prince of Greece are different entities than Satan, especially the prince of Persia. Like I imagine in my mind that he's probably somebody like the moon god that everybody worshiped, because that worship was so prominent. I mean, I could be wrong, but it's just speculation. It's a way of thinking about it that shows you it doesn't have to be Satan. You could say that maybe the prince of Greece is Satan, but the problem with that is that you would think that would mean that Zeus, so let's step back for a minute. We've said that Satan is Baal, is Zeus. There's one more link which you need to know about, which is the most everybody knows about this if they know their mythology, that Zeus and Jupiter are the same entity. So Zeus is the high god of the Greeks and Jupiter the high god of the Romans. So you could think then, okay, well maybe that would mean Satan is the prince of Greece, but I tend to think no, because when Plato talks about this, he does not say that Zeus was allotted to Greece. He says Athena and Hephaestus were allotted, and he says that Zeus is the high god over them all. And so it's like, well, what does that mean? Where is he at? Well, maybe that means that he's the high god of Persia. I don't know, but maybe possible. Maybe he's the high god of even Rome at that point in time. Because Daniel's fairly late book. Rome had already been established. Maybe somehow this entity managed to make his way over there and started seeding his power in Europe, and things took off. I don't know, but I tend to think that they're different.
Okay. Can you track? So you're saying, you're going from Zeus and Jupiter to Baal to Satan. Can you track that? Can you track that further into the present time and say, where has that?
Well, so that gets
link
into a
today?
really interesting, there's a lot of things you can do with that. I mean, the simplest answer for me for that is that the Roman Empire technically never went away. We're kind of still under it. When you think about, I mean, I get that we had, like British empires and Spanish empires, even the Dutch and stuff like that. But did they ever like take over Rome? Well, no. Politically, what happened was there was a Reformation that kind of split away from Rome, at least theologically. So maybe politically, that's the same thing that we find, because in the Reformation, that was as much political as it was religious. Like when Luther, nails the thesis, what happens? Germany and Scandinavia become Lutheran. And then what happens a couple decades later when Calvin rises to power? Well, France and Switzerland become Calvinist. And, so what I'm saying is that it's political. And so if there's like a split off of the Roman Empire, without a takeover. Maybe the Roman Empire has never gone away, and maybe Satan is still in control of it. A funny thing in my Reformed tradition, we have a confession of faith, and we confess that the Pope is the Antichrist. Well, that comes all the way back to the beginning of the Reformers. Every Reformer said that the Pope is the Antichrist, and I find that really interesting because we pretty much tie Satan to the Antichrist, and we've just talked about how Satan is the Prince of Rome, and where is Vatican City? It's right in the heart of it.
Heyo.
So I don't know.
It's fine.
That's
I totally.
yeah, that's pretty relevant for this. Yeah, with
I
the
actually
new
think
Pope.
it is kind of. I mean, I'm not trying
Yeah.
to pick on Catholics or whatever, but I'm just saying it's interesting.
I mean, I had
Now
a
this is
conversation.
yeah, go ahead.
Oh no, I was supposed to say I had a conversation with my mother-in-law, kind of about that same idea of Rome and then the Pope, and then she was the one who said, like, what if the Pope's the Antichrist? And then I made a joke about the new one being from Chicago, and it kind of just went downhill from there. But
Yep.
I guess one of the things that I start to think about here is how did Jesus's death kind of affect all of this? Was I guess I'm gonna air quote Satan, because we've kind of talked about how all this works. Were those powers like nerfed at all, or did they change, or did his deception just change? And it's not. I mean, how did Jesus's death, I guess, affect all of this?
Great question. Like this is to me, it's kind of a climactic question for the whole discussion, and really where you should take any discussion of Satan. He's a defeated creature, even if he still prowls around like a roaring lion. So to some degree, this has to get into eschatology, and I'll have to give you my eschatology. But before you get there, I understand that there's kind of stages in which Jesus comes and he attacks the kingdom of Satan. So for example, when he's born and Herod is satanically inspired to kill, like that's a satanic attack and he fails. You have the temptation where Satan then tries to tempt and he fails. And then you have Jesus starting his ministry, his public ministry, and he goes through and he starts casting out demons or healing people. And what is that? As we saw earlier with Matthew 12, that's a direct attack on the kingdom of Satan that actually the Pharisees try to flip on its head. So Jesus is doing stuff in his ministry as he's bringing in however way he does it, his heavenly kingdom, the kingdom of God, kingdom of heaven, showing that it has power in this realm now, in places that it never had before. So now you come to something like, well, first you have to understand something legal. How we've talked about how Satan is an accuser and that was kind of a law court thing. So these entities, I very strongly believe, run via law and covenant. So when God gives the nations to these entities, there's a covenant. It's an inheritance. I mean, that's what it's called. They inherit one another. Well, that's kind of like a last will and testament. That's a legal document. So in order for them to no longer be able to have the power that they had, something legal has to take place. And it has to be the dissolution of that covenant. And I think Psalm 89 is actually predicting, when it's giving a prediction of the new covenant with the Davidic king. And it actually gives some really tantalizing hints that the declaration of that covenant took place at the transfiguration on top of Mount Hermon, which is actually the very same mountain that the Watchers came down in Genesis 6 and committed their deed, and which also happens to be the mountain of the divine council and of Baal in Canaanite mythology. So when Jesus, think about this one, when Jesus is right after that event, he goes, I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven. Now let that sink in. Lightning. Well, now wait a minute. Lightning, isn't that what we just said Baal is? The lightning god? And didn't we just say that Satan is the lightning? Is the same deity? So what if Jesus is saying that when the Father on the Mount of Transfiguration said, this is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased, he's actually declaring the beginning of a new covenant, which is going to destroy the old covenant because those entities have broken their covenant. Okay, so that's when it's announced. And then the covenant has to be cut at some point in time in order for it to be enacted. Covenants are always enacted by blood. Go back to Abraham and you find that kind of an idea with circumcision, or when God is walking through the pieces of the sacrifice, right? So covenants are cut in blood. Well, that's what happens when Jesus dies. This is the moment that the new covenant is enacted. Okay, it's cut at that moment. And then when Jesus, so that's his death. And then when Jesus rises from the dead and he ascends into heaven, this is when the announcement that all power in heaven and earth has been given to me now. And now, like Peter says in 1 Peter 3, all these entities are now in subjection to his authority as King of Kings. Now, that doesn't mean that these entities have gone away. It doesn't mean that they don't have any more power. So now here comes my eschatology part of this. When you go to Revelation 20, and this is a very different take than the modern kind of eschatology take. So you guys can think about it for a while. But you have this binding of Satan, okay? And so he's bound for 1,000 years. And I just wrote a new book on this, Rings of Revelation. It's a book that came out last year that kind of explains. And it says that he's bound for 1,000 years. And a lot of people think, well, that's got to be a future thing, because obviously Satan's still here. And I agree, Satan is still here. But what they do is they interpret that passage to mean that Satan must be absolutely bound in every way, shape, and form, that he's no longer here at all. And the problem that you find, there's lots of problems with it, but one of them is that binding language is not unique to John and Revelation. You find this language going on in the book of Enoch. And you find that, for example, Azazel, who was one of the watchers in Genesis 6 in that story, he's actually bound in Tartarus. But you come to Leviticus, which takes place long after that, and you find that there's a Day of Atonement ritual where, for some reason, 2 of these goats are offered, and one of them is offered to Azazel. But how could that be if binding means he's completely obliterated or gone for that whole time during the binding? I don't think that that's what it means. I think that he's bound from doing certain things, Azazel is. And I think the same thing is true of Satan. And in fact, John explains that when he says that he can no longer deceive the nations. And this is super duper important for people to at least hear and think about, okay? Because prior to Pentecost, the nations of the world were in darkness. This is what the whole book of Acts is about. At Pentecost, things change. They change slowly, but they change nevertheless. You find for the first time that other peoples start to be saved by the gospel in some mass incredible way. And by the time you get to like Paul's missionary journeys, you find that these people don't even have to go to Israel to become Jews or be saved. They can be saved in the middle of Turkey. They can be saved in the middle of pagan Corinth or Athens, because something has happened legally to the authority of these entities that they held control over the nations, and they no longer do. They're no longer able to deceive the nation so that the gospel can come into those people and it can change them where they are at. And that actually demonstrates that Satan is bound today, because that's been happening for 2,000 years, and it didn't happen prior to Pentecost. It just didn't. That was a radical shift in all of human history that we continue to live under today. So that's a lot, I know, but
Oh yeah, it's fine. I've got a note written over here going, "Ask Doug to come talk about the end times." Well, and I when we start talking about that, I kind of think of it's Mark. Is it Mark 3:27 where it talks about the binding of the strong man and kind of the
yeah,
reaping?
that's kind of the parallel to what we saw in Matthew.
And so it's so Satan being bound with the eschatological view is basically has been kneecapped, right? He's just he can still.
Or I say he's been put under house arrest, if you want to put it like that. So where is he at? He's in his house. What's his house? He's been cast down to earth. So he's no longer allowed to go back and forth between heaven and earth or whatever. It's kind of the way I conceive of it. But he was able to prowl around down here like a roaring lion.
Yeah.
At the same time that he's able to have power over people, but he cannot stop the spread of the gospel when it goes in power to save people wherever it happens. And that's
so how. Yeah, and how can he affect Christians today? Because you hear people talk about, well, can Satan read your mind and this and that, which he can't. But how can he affect, I guess, Christians today would be a good question, because you hear like exorcists talk about how they met Satan and cast him out of somebody one time. And, you hear stories like that. And I always think like, don't you think Satan would be going after somebody like the president of the United States or people like in much higher positions, I guess. So for like
Pope.
the normal Christian,
Sorry.
the Pope, yeah, somebody like that. No, because you hear those stories and you're like, well, that was just like some random person that didn't have a whole lot of power. I always kind of struggle with those because I'm like, like you said, you think he would be like going after the Pope, like controlling things in a different way. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, my first thought is, who says he's not?
Yeah, well, yeah,
Right. We look at things and we're not looking at them from a spiritual point of view. Biblically speaking, okay, every single person is born into the kingdom of Satan. That's where we're born into. We are born slaves to sin, and we're born in the kingdom of darkness. Ephesians 2 is very clear about this. Like we once belonged to the power of the air and darkness, but we've been set free by the gospel. So that means by default, the default is not that we're born in some neutral place, and the default is certainly not that we're born Christians. It's that we're literally born as slaves to this dark kingdom. And here Satan is being used kind of as a metonymy for all the spiritual powers. Like, I don't have a problem with that for ease of thinking. And you have to be set free from that. So what that means, practically speaking, is if somebody's not a Christian, they already belong to Satan. So what does he need to do to them?
Mm-hmm.
So he spends his time attacking people that are Christian. And especially he spends his time, I think, attacking the church, because this is where God has given the keys of the kingdom to be able to bind and loose things. And so if he can get us fighting with each other, and if he can get us sidetracked in the millions of different ways that we have been, then he's doing a great job. And I think that's been a major strategy that he's used for 2,000 years.
The classic Baptist committee, man. That's all I was thinking right there. The classic Baptist committee.
Yeah.
Man.
Now, I guess another one. How does he show up? Like I'm thinking of like say Muhammad or Joseph Smith.
Yeah.
What kind of role does he?
There's two different issues that you've raised I want to deal with. The first one is that question. So, like I'm not convinced that Muhammad or Joseph Smith saw Satan. I'm not going to say they didn't, but I am convinced that they saw some kind of a supernatural fallen being, and that it talked to them, and that it showed great power, and that it was able to cast spells over large swaths of people, starting with the founder of those two religions. Like, that's not hard for me to believe at all. Who would those entities be? I believe that they would be some kind of fallen angel. Now, I'm gonna go back to an earlier question that you raised, Caleb, about it was dancing along the lines of exorcism. So when you read about Satan being the prince of demons, in the New Testament, evil spirits are actually not fallen angels. Nobody in the first century believed that. They're actually the offspring of the fallen angels and human women. They're the Nephilim. They're the spirits of the Nephilim. So those entities, very clearly from the New Testament, can indwell people, or they can demonize them, or they can possess them, or whatever. I'm not certain that a fallen angel can do that. And the reason why is because fallen angels have bodies. You remember the story of Abraham and the three men who come to him, and he sees them, and he washes their feet. He has a big dinner with them. Well, those are actually two angels and the angel of the Lord. So there's three angels, and they're completely embodied entities. They have bodies. They're not disembodied. But a Nephilim, when it dies, it no longer has its body. And so this was the first century explanation. So because it's disembodied, it seeks to inhabit bodies. So there's two different kinds of entities that we're dealing here with. I tend to not think that that a demon, like we find as an evil spirit that like caused Legion to be so strong and stuff, I don't think that that's what Joseph Smith and Muhammad are dealing with. And I also don't think that a fallen angel is what you're dealing with when you're dealing with somebody who's possessed by the devil.
So would demons be subject to these fallen spirits?
I
and
think
these
so.
other entities?
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
And
we
they would,
have there's actually some Old Testament and kind of ancient Near Eastern mythology that helps you think about that if you think about hell as a realm, kind of like you think about earth as a realm, it's a place and it has a king over it. So in your Greek mythology, the three main brothers were Zeus and Poseidon and Hades. And Zeus is the god of the air, and really he becomes the god of the world. Poseidon is the god of the sea, and that's why he's kind of like the god who takes it. And then you have Hades, who becomes the god of the underworld, which is why the place is named after him. That's what hell is. So Hades has a king, whatever you want to name him, whatever it is. That king then has I don't know, henchmen or something that are down there that kind of carry out the tasks of bodyguards and other like dark things that you don't want to have to deal with. And you find in the Old Testament there's like these really cryptic terms where the Rephaim, which is another term for a giant, are like down there in Sheol, and therefore this is not a place you want to go. And so yeah, I think that means that there's a king and they're subject to that king. Obviously, they're all subject to the king in terms of their own kind of bureaucracy, politics. They have to answer to Satan, which is why I think Jesus calls him the prince.
oh man, we're right at probably about an hour, and I've got about 35 other questions that I want to ask here. And but this is probably a pretty good spot for us to end it here. You got anything else to kind of end us with, Caleb?
I guess a good place to end it talking about Satan. How will he be defeated in the end?
Great question. I'm not entirely sure I understand the answer to that. I've been kicking around this idea with some of my friends, and there's a very interesting verse in Colossians where Paul says that if the rulers of the age, and he includes heavenly and earthly rulers, so spiritual beings, and if they would have understand what they were doing, they never would have put Jesus. So in other words, the prophecies are cryptic deliberately so that the plan of God would go to. And I've often wondered, like, we're pretty confident people when it comes to eschatology and what we think is going to happen in the future, which is funny because for 2,000 years we've all been wrong. And it's like there's some kind of thing where I'm pretty confident. So we all views can agree that Satan will be let loose at some point in time. Maybe he's been let loose now. Maybe that's 1,000 years from now. I don't know. But at some point in time, God will destroy him. And, Revelation uses different images for this, like with the word of his power or, with the coming of Christ, whatever that means. I'm not sure exactly what Jesus is going to do. Is he going to like literally take this heavenly being and physically wrap him up and tie him into a place like called the lake of fire? I mean, maybe, I don't know. But I also know that we're dealing with spiritual realities, and I know that the gospel is a spiritual reality that can free people from his tyranny just by the speaking of a word. It's like when Isaiah speaks to the dead bones, and the prophet is asked, "Can these dry bones live?" And he goes, "I don't know. Only you know, God. You tell me." And so he says, "Preach to the dry bones, and the dry bones come to life." And he's completely amazed, And there's an army from what? Just from speaking. And so I mean, that to me shows the power of the gospel, that I do believe in one way or another is attached to the final destruction of Satan, most likely probably at the direct instigation of the Son of God and the second coming. But how that plays itself out, I have absolutely no idea.
I guess the main point is he will be defeated.
He will be defeated. Yeah. Well, that's the good news, is he's already a defeated foe. It's just that he hasn't been thrown in, kind of given his final sentence or whatever, and then thrown in. And that's why you can talk about him, right? That's why you don't have to be afraid of having conversations like this. Satan is not more powerful than God. God's already defeated him in Christ. And so why can't I try and understand the enemy a little bit better? Because, when you do, it starts making a whole lot more sense of a whole lot of things in the Bible that you never imagined that it would.
And you see the world in a different way when you start looking at it like that. You start seeing evil in places you never would have thought.
100%.
Man. Well, this has just been awesome. I'll give you a standing ovation if I could, right, man? This is great. This is awesome.
Is a lot of fun.
I've really enjoyed it, and now I've got about 8 other different topics that, hey, if you ever want to come back and talk about eschatology, open invitation. Come on. Well, Doug, do you want to take a moment and kind of tell us a little bit about where we can find your books or your podcasts and stuff like that? And man, you got an awesome church that you've been pastoring since 2001, you know?
Yeah, I'm the pastor at the church is in kind of near Boulder, Colorado, which is ironic because Boulder's completely. But I guess sort of I am too. I hang out in this fringy world. Yeah, come out and visit the Reformed Baptist Church in Northern Colorado. Our website for that is rbcnc.com. All my sermons that I've ever done pretty much are up on that website. You can go and listen. They're also at sermonaudio.com. And if there's a weird topic and I've preached on it, on that book, likely I've dealt with whatever your question is. I have a personal website, douglasvandorn.com. And you can find my books there. You can find all my books at Amazon. I have a bunch of them on some normal topics like church creeds or five solas of the Reformation or baptism. And I have some topics on giants and conspiracy theories and the angel of the Lord. So I kind of try and dabble in both worlds. And one other thing is that I've been doing a recent podcast with another pastor friend called the Reformed Fringe. And you can listen to that on YouTube. It's a weekly show that we do. And we've also started a kind of a platform that helps people that are either in our Reformed world or are not hostile to Reformed theology to come and, be able to get to know other people that are thinking about these kinds of things and to talk about them. And it's really been helpful for people. We started, I think, at the end of January to 150 people, I think, something like that already. So we're excited about that. That's reformedfringe.com.
Reformedfringe.com. I totally wrote that down. Well, awesome. Well, thank you so much for hanging out with us. We've enjoyed it, and it has been awesome. And yeah, check out Doug, his books, all that kind of stuff. Check out his website. I guess if you're near Boulder, Colorado, and you want to visit his church, man, go for it. Sounds like it'd be an awesome church. Ooh, I do remember one question I thought at the very beginning. What's like the weirdest thing you've ever preached on?
Man, everything I preach is like, I don't know. To me, weird is a category. It's not just like, thinking about Bigfoot, but it's more just what is the Christian world, especially the world that I'm living in, what are they not wanting to talk about, but yet is just kind of right in front of their eyes. All kinds of things, from normal weird things like why do we baptize adults and Christians? Like I think I have a pretty good answer most people have never thought of. To the divine counsel stuff we talked about tonight, to Satan being Baal. I mean, that's pretty wild stuff. To crazy cryptid creatures that are found in the Bible that you never knew were there. I mean, I just love this whole world. I love thinking about it and the practical implication.
Right at the very end of this podcast, I got another one. Ask Doug to do another interview about cryptic biblical creatures.
Judd would be better for that than I.
I totally have Judd's book, wherever it is. I got it from my dad, The Paranormal Big Country, because it's all Central Texas stories and stuff like that. And I'm like, I've been there. I know that.
And we want to try to talk to him about the dire wolves and what's going on with that.
Oh, yeah.
There you go. Oh, yeah.
Well, all right. Well, thank you so much for talking to us, Doug. This has been awesome. So thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you guys for listening to Raising the Wild Ones podcast. I know me and Caleb are just a couple of redneck theologians, right? Kind of came up with that term a little while ago, and it's just kind of making us laugh. But that's really just what we are, right? Every single one of us is a theologian. Sit there and just think about the Bible, and me and Caleb are rednecks. So that makes us redneck theologians. And so we just thank you guys for listening to us. And if you want to just give us a holler and let us know about topics you may want to listen to or things you may want to say, or if you have an idea for a guest host, or if you yourself want to be a guest host, just drop us a line. Just let us know. Just give us a ring on the old telly. Actually, not really. We don't have a cell phone number, right? But we do have an email, and you can send us an email, right, at raisingwildonespodcast@gmail.com. There'll be a link for that podcast down in the description. And so just kind of click on that and just let us know what you guys want to hear from us. And we like to hear from you guys too. We like to know what you guys think of our podcast. And so also just tell your friends, share it on social media. Just let people know when you're sitting down having a cup of coffee with your hunting buddies or fishing buddies. Just say, hey guys, listen to this podcast. It's these two rednecks, and they're kind of weird sometimes, but it's fine because they talk about some cool stuff. And so just let people know, and that's how the word gets out, and that's how it gets shared. So we just thank you guys so much for your support and for listening to us. And yeah, tune in next time for more from the Redneck Theologians.
Hey everybody, I just wanted to reach out and bring you some exciting news. Our Patreon is now live. Patreon is a way to support this podcast so we can keep it going. For $6 a month, which is the cost of a cup of coffee, you get exclusive content that is for members only. This includes special episodes, show notes, and early release of our upcoming episodes. As we grow, more will become available through our membership. Another exciting thing is that we will donate $1 out of the $6 membership fee to missions. This money will go into the hands of missionaries on the ground doing the Lord's work. We are working on this and will hopefully have a podcast episode where we interview the missionary soon, so stay tuned for this. So go to patreon.com/Raising the Wild Ones podcast, or click on the link to our Patreon site in the show notes below. Thank you for supporting this podcast, and God bless.